The more evidence, the better, I say.
I mean, this is so improbable.
That's a bold statement.
I mean, I think that's a fair point, but I didn't make that argument. He did.
Why is that true? Is that a good question? Maybe it's not.
Drew, you're not supposed to ask good questions like
sorry,
that.
sorry.
Ask difficult questions.
Bill, jump in here.
I'm Bill the Christian.
And I'm Drew the Skeptic.
You're listening to The Divide. All right, we're at the American Atheists Convention, and I'm sitting here not with Drew. Drew is unfortunately not with us, but we'll have a little 10-minute after show where we discuss the interview. I'm sitting here with Neil. Welcome, Neil.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. And I just want to say I really support the premise of your podcast, which is getting Christians and atheists talking. And I think the more friendly conversation that is had and the more communication that we have, the more we can understand one another. And we might not agree on everything, but I think the conversation is really important.
Excellent. Thank you. I did not ask Neil to even say this. I'm kind of surprised by it, but I'm glad you did, truly, and I appreciate your thoughts there. You've been an atheist a long time. By the way, you're a cellist. You play my favorite instrument, I think. So it's an honor to interview you.
Well,
but you've been an atheist a long time, 40 to 50 years.
Yeah, something like that. I'm 64, and I think I could comfortably call myself an atheist since I was in high school.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I guess the first question I have for you is, has atheism evolved? Are the young atheists noticeably different, as millennials in a lot of other ways seem very different, and whether religious, Christian, Baptist, Muslim, it seems like everybody I talk to, Mormon, their millennials are a little different from the last known number of decades of people who were religious. So is this true of atheism?
I think it is true. When Madeline O'Hare started American Atheists, she did so when women were really not supposed to be leaders, and she was an atheist, and it was very difficult for her. I think the word atheism had a lot of negative connotations attached to it. If you were an atheist, you were also just assumed to be a communist and an enemy of America, the United States, and so I think that was one reason why, when she started her organization, actually it was called, I think it was called Maryland. I forgot the name of the original organization, but eventually became known as American Atheists, to kind of highlight the fact that you can be atheist and patriotic too, and so I think it was a very difficult time. She had...
And that was, just to be clear, that was because at that time, to be an atheist, often you were associated with communism.
Well, that was just a part of it.
Yeah.
That was just a part of it. I think that, she basically had to kick down the door for atheism, and she had to be very aggressive, and she could be. She could be very abrasive, and her ability to reason was like a knife. It would just cut right through the BS right to the point, and in a way that was not always considerate of other people or what have you. But I think that given the work that she did, kind of helped change the landscape for those that came after her. And I have seen, I've been a member of American Atheists since 1986. So I was not there, in the beginning. I did know Madeline O'Hare, John, and Robin, and considered them my friends. But I think that they really did work to change the landscape so that the atheists that came after her had an easier time of it. And I think that's the big difference, is that certainly the younger atheists have the benefit of the work that has been done by the atheists that came before them. I think that, the other difference could be perhaps in the realm of knowledge and science, because science has advanced. And so I think that as science advances, I think oftentimes that means the arena where religion exists shrinks. I think that the society is becoming more and more scientific, and a little bit more scientific-minded, and a little less kind of geared toward magical thinking that I associate with religion.
Do you think that's true about issues like transgender? Because a lot of the religious community don't see that as they see that as not scientific, you know. So, and yet it tends to be more on the left that you see that sort of thinking. So, do you see that as an exception, or how would you view it?
Well, that's
we won't
very,
go real long on that. I'm just curious.
That's really interesting. I think that when I first joined American Atheists, Madeline O'Hare made a point of working with gay atheists throughout the country, and there were gay chapters of American Atheists throughout the country. The largest one being in Houston, run by Don Sanders and Mark Franceschini. And they were very, very active. Don was on the board. And I think it was this kind of shared interest in civil rights and making sure that everyone had equal rights. Because I think that atheists have suffered in that regard along with gay atheists. Now gay, or just gays in general, now gays have secured many of the rights that are due to them that everyone else has. And I think there's still more work to be done, especially with just attitudes, but I think they have come a long way, and I think now the groups that are still marginalized are ones that I was not even aware of. Like, I didn't hear the word trans until, I don't know, maybe 10, 15 years ago.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I'm sure that there were those people there, but they were so marginalized and so in the closet that I wasn't even aware of that issue. But I think that the problem that we have in our society, if I can speak really broadly, is that religion and religious ideas promote thinking which in many ways is inherently discriminatory. And when that becomes embodied in law, then people are not accorded equal rights. And I think that we need to live and work toward a country where everybody has equal rights. Certainly you don't have to agree with someone. You know, if someone thinks that it's wrong to be gay or what have you, I mean, that's a fine, that's okay to have that discussion. But I think when it comes to the law, I think it's really
So this is why I asked about transgender, just because scientifically, you know, a person is, their gender seems determinable, their sex and their gender seem to be the same, or at least intricately related, like biology is the basis of gender in the scientific world, but doesn't seem to be so in like a lot of people who are transgender separate the two.
Well,
so,
I'm not sure I'm following you, but I,
in other words,
I will say this.
In other words, biological sex seems to be demonstrable, you know, it's scientific. Gender, some people who are transgender have told me that gender is separate from the biology.
Right.
So this, to me, does not seem very scientific. So I'm curious. I was asking about that issue because because to me that seems like that's an issue which is, as far as the science goes, is pretty clear. But for some reason, in the non-religious communities, they're not following the science. That's what I was trying to get at.
Well, I think that, you know, as science has progressed, I mean, I think that now I'm not a biologist, you know. I'm
You're not a biological. You're not a biology teacher,
not a
cellist.
I'm not a polymath, but I will say that from what I have studied and what I have read, is that gender is fluid, and you know, I would like to say that I think that a lot of times the problem with religion is that it's either black and white, male and female, good and evil, and they miss the subtleties of kind of like, it's not always a binary situation. And I think that even when you look at the biology of sex, you have male and female, but you have gradations between. And you know, some people are born with both sex organs, right? Or different amounts of that. And some people are very comfortable, you know, in their gender, and other people aren't. And so I think when it comes to gender, I mean, if you're talking about something physical, I mean, we have science to go on, but when you're talking about gender, that deals with a person's kind of psychology, I guess, right?
Yeah.
I don't know how scientifically you go about determining that, but I think that it's just really important to treat people the way that they want to be treated if it's possible.
I was only asking just because of you had mentioned where science is on the rise, religion tends to shrink, and I'm thinking, that obviously much of science is pretty binary, right? Like you have cancer or you don't, or you have a tumor or you don't. There are things that are clearly binary in science. It's not, and I'm assuming that you'd agree that through most of history, as even in your lifetime, trans is fairly new. Certainly historically, it's not as though you have so much of this phenomenon. I guess it doesn't seem to me, in my experience, to be represented in the literature. So it feels like it's a fairly new phenomenon that people are claiming this, and it seems to me more if it's on the left or more on the people who tend to, I think, to their credit, have been a little bit less dismissive of some science. Whereas I agree with you that in some areas religious people have been dismissive of some science. But this seems in one area where to me it seems like it's flipped. But I don't want to talk too long about it. I was just asking about it.
I'm certainly not the person to talk to about the trans issues. I do support people that are, LG,
right.
But
maybe I could ask you about that part specifically about the sort of the morality of our like in terms of an evolution within the atheist community. Do you feel like in terms of sort of moral values, I think you've already hinted at this, but has it been pretty stable, or do you feel like there's been some change in any way? And then I would include in that free speech, by the way, where it seems to me free speech is not as valued in some of the communities on the left as much as it was in the past. So can you speak to that from your experience?
Well, I think, that's really an interesting question. I'm a big proponent of free speech, and I think that you might find that there are some people with different opinions on what should be allowed as far as speech goes, even in the atheist community. But I think by and large, I think people in our community do support free speech. I think that there has been a new category, invented called hate speech, which carries increased penalties. If you commit a crime,
right?
And it's,
and you're content with this, or you have some concerns about it?
I do have some concerns because I think that I don't know that if I can really speak intelligently on the issue. There's a lot more thinking that I have to do on it, but I am concerned that about limiting the speech of people that don't believe because I think it's possible that could happen, that we could see the rise of blasphemy laws again in this country. I think it's certainly a problem elsewhere in the world.
Do you feel like young atheists are a little bit less, do they value free speech less than, you don't see that?
I don't think so.
Seems the same.
I mean, I think that there have been instances on college campuses where
that's what I was thinking of.
Yeah, where people have been against people on the far right from speaking. People that are racist or
like Charles Murray, was treated at Cal Berkeley, I think it was, quite badly. But then Sam Harris, it's like, for me, it's a little confusing because if Murray's such a racist, I don't think of Sam Harris as being countenancing that myself, from what little I know of him. And yet the Berkeley people thought he shouldn't be allowed to speak. So,
well, I don't know. I am really hesitant to muzzle someone from speaking. That's me speaking.
Right.
I don't know that I'm really empowered to speak for anybody else, but I can tell you that I am a very strong proponent of free speech, and I think this idea of engaging is really important.
I appreciate your answer, by the way. What is your reaction to the I've encountered here these gatherings on Sundays that there's groups that promote gathering together, atheists gathering together on Sundays. And there's a couple of different ones I've encountered.
Yeah.
And there's also, of course, atheist camps, sort of summer camps and things. But let's just talk about the Sunday thing, because they have songs, and they describe them as hymns. Some of them do.
Well,
and they describe them as, you know, they have a devotional talk, and they do. So is this sort of something that new atheists do, and it wasn't really a part of your world when you were?
It wasn't. It wasn't. And I think that
you know why I'm asking, because it sounds like
it
these
sounds
people
like
are
atheism is a church now, right?
They sound very religious. Surprise, surprise, humans are being religious.
Well, I think it's not so much, I wouldn't read too much religion into that. I think it's more community, and I think that people, especially that come out of religion, that are used to having that community on a Sunday morning. It's kind of a convenient time for some people that like to get up early and not sleep in.
The few of us.
Those few. So for some people, it's great. I mean, I went once and I had a good time, and but it's not my thing, you know. So,
do you see that it could potentially create some of the problems that religious practices do? You know, that there's this group, they believe something, they hang out together, and they say they're free thinkers, but at the same time, it starts to, you know. I asked one of them, would it be okay if someone gave a devotional talk on pro-life? How would that go over in your group, you know?
Yeah.
And I could tell by their reaction, it's like, that's not going to go over well, you know? So it's, in other words, my point is that it creates a set of values in that group that characterize that group, the things they tend to identify with. And does that potentially, from your perspective, create some of the same kinds of things atheists kind of stand against in the way churches deal with their young people and things like that?
Well, it's very interesting because atheists, we're all very different from one another, and what we're looking for is very different. There's no holy book for us. There's no doctrine or anything like that. Basically, an atheist is someone that just does not have a belief in a God or gods. That's basically it.
But wait. Now let me push on that just a little bit, if I may, because I've been around here this weekend. It does not feel like that's all it is. There's a sort of moral
level,
there's certainly a moral accordance that I discover in the people I talk to across this convention, that it's more than just a lack of belief in God.
Well,
so how would you respond to that?
I think it's interesting because there are all kinds of atheists, but if you want to look at what we share, what we have in common, it's a lack of belief in God or gods. Now, that can be expressed a couple of ways. Like, for instance, people that come out of Christianity, like, they may assert positively that they think the Christian God cannot exist because there are too many logical contradictions, that it is impossible for an all-knowing, all-benevolent, and all-powerful being to exist. It's just illogical. It cannot work. And the whole Christian story from Adam and Eve all the way up to someone being God, basically being crucified on a cross to make a blood sacrifice to forgive our sins, which it really makes no sense to me. I think that if you ask most people here, they would be very positive in saying that they don't believe a Christian God exists. They would make that as a positive statement. Yeah. Now, if you talk to them about a deistic God, you might get a little bit more of a nuanced answer, right?
Yes.
It might be a little bit more like there's no evidence. There's insufficient, I should say that, insufficient evidence for the existence of a deistic God. So I think that it depends on the specific God, how you define God.
So what I was referring to, although I take your point well, is that there's a moral, a set of moral values that seem to me to characterize the group. I'm pretty confident that the moral values are more on the left.
I think that's probably true. Although
so it's more than
we do
just
have
not,
our you know, our gun rights advocates in American Atheists. We have our conservative, Republican,
Absolutely.
atheists also.
I like famously Charles Krauthammer and George Will.
But I think your point is that by and large, most atheists tend to be a little bit more on the left side of the scale, and I think that's probably true. I think that when you look at the present Republican Party, which has really taken a hard turn to the right, and I think become even racist, just to some degree. I would say that most atheists are more interested in equal rights for people, and I mean, I can't speak for all atheists, but I would say that atheists have a problem with religion and not the people that practice it. I think the fact that we can have a conversation, and that your co-host, you can have a conversation, it means that we can exist together in the same space.
Yeah.
Right? And the problem is really...
Yeah. Almost kind of the reverse of the way Christians say God hates the sin and loves the sinner. It's sort of like saying that the atheist hates the religious practices but can love the religious person. Something like that.
I think that's
so long as they're not just a
accurate.
racist, you know, whatever. Okay, so yeah, because I'm pretty sure, you know, that if Christian friends of mine came here and walked around the exhibit, you know, hall, they would definitely say, you know, this gathering isn't just about belief in God. Non-belief in God. It's got a set of values attached to it that are distinctly, you know, a distinct set of values that could be different.
Well, I think that, you know, you're talking about the lack of belief in God, but that extends to the problems of religion in our society, and the impact that it has on various people in our society. And I think
even that itself is a set of values.
I think most atheists are looking for, you know, a place at the table. You know, we want our voices to be heard. We care about other people, and we want to make sure that everyone's rights are respected.
Do you think that some of this is, I hear people use this terminology occasionally. They'll say they're a Christian atheist. And what they mean is that they acknowledge that they grew up in a Christian context and they have sort of a Christian instinct about morality. And so that when they become an atheist, in a lot of ways, their motivation to become an atheist, not exclusively, of course, not that like it's non-intellectual, but they're disappointed in the moral practices of the people who are religious, and that they, you know, like equal rights and treating everybody with dignity sound like really uniquely Christian ideas. I mean, the Romans just frankly didn't care at all about those types of ideas. They were perfectly happy to have a class system and to condescend and to think truly other human beings were inferior. Not saying every Roman thought that way. There were some unique examples of people that weren't like that. The Stoic philosophers in particular, some in the 1st century AD especially, but normally, you know, Caesar didn't have much of a conscience for just wiping out whole villages. So these are, to me, these strike me as very uniquely Christian set of values that actually a lot of people now on the Christian right, quote right, are, you know, trying themselves to, I'm not saying this is the majority, but there's a lot of people within the evangelical Christian right who take their Bible seriously that are trying to say they're absolutely opposed to Trump's wall. They're absolutely opposed to the way the homosexual or the LGBTQ community is treated. And there's a lot more voices of people even like that who, inspired by their Christian faith and the way they understand Christ's teachings, there's a kind of a unique agreement, I think, in some ways like that. So do you see it that way? In other words, I kind of look at it as though the reason... Okay, all right, I didn't think you would, so
no.
Go ahead and speak to that, and that'll be our final thing.
Okay, well, I don't think Christianity has any ownership on morality. I just don't. I think that morality is culturally based, and Christianity has piggybacked on that. I don't know how Muslim morals are different than Christian morals. I don't know how atheist morals are different than Muslim morals or the morals of a Buddhist. I mean, I think that if there's a difference, it's a cultural difference. And when I look, I'm not an expert in the Bible, but I've read enough of it to see some pretty atrocious things committed by Christians, by Jehovah. And I don't think, this is why I don't think the Christian God is all good. I think he's kind of an evil person. I just, and I guess
A really
I'm
evil
my
person
words a
who
little
died
bit.
for the world?
Well, first of all, I think that's a disgusting concept that someone else can pay the sins of another. The whole concept of sin, I think, is a ridiculous concept. But I think I have to say that the more I study Christianity, and I'm not really studying it hard, but
Yeah.
I would say the more I'm exposed to it, the more I'm disgusted by it. And I think that, you know, when it comes to teaching morals, I grew up in a Christian home, and I've seen others parent their children. They never say to their child if they're misbehaving, you shouldn't do that because, then pick your quote from the Bible. I've never seen them. Now, maybe there are some parents out there that do that,
Yeah.
but I think morality is based in emotion and empathy, right? And I think it's part of growing up and becoming kind of part of, you know, our culture, I guess.
Yeah.
Being an adult is.
And I'm
is
definitely in
part of
agreement that emotion and empathy and sympathy and stuff seem to come as part of our package, like as human beings.
It doesn't come from the Bible.
And so, to be clear, I agree with you that I don't think morality is invented by Christianity, or that people are moral only because they have some contact with Christianity or something like that. That's demonstrably false from history. What the take I would probably have is that we can chart the influence of moral ideas in history. We can look back at how cultures and whole civilizations behaved over long periods of time and at least generalize somewhat, and that Christianity has had a defined impact on the culture. It's part of what's defined the
Without
culture,
a doubt.
morally even.
And I would say that it has held our culture back.
Okay.
Some of the prescriptions in the Bible about how to treat gays or you know, non-believers or witches even. I mean, like, it's just really primitive.
Okay. So we're in agreement that
or the treatment of women or slaves, slavery. I mean, we have.
Well, I mean, slavery ended, of course, as the result of the influence of Christianity in the Roman world.
I would dispute that.
Okay.
Coming from the South, and there were.
I just meant
There
in the
were
ancient world.
churches in the South that used the Bible to justify the
I'm not.
ownership
I wouldn't
of
dispute
slaves.
that at all. I was
And-
talking about the ancient world, the influence
Oh.
of Christianity in the ancient world, too, on slavery. But
Well, that's going back pretty far, isn't it? I don't know that I could.
well, I mean,
really-
slavery didn't just exist from the Romans all the way up through early America.
So, but your point is that.
My point is that the love your neighbor as yourself and do unto others, I think we can chart that historically, that actually wasn't a part of the classical world or the ancient civilizations prior, outside of
the golden rule has been in other cultures besides the Christian.
Do you have one specifically in mind?
Well, there's. I think you can Google it, and it's been a while since I looked up it. But there's the silver rule, you know, where. I think that
Yeah,
the
the
flaw
negative
with
side
the
of it.
golden the flaw with the golden rule is, let's say it goes, treat others as you would have them treat yourself, is that it assumes that everybody else wants what you want, and I think the better version of that rule is to treat people the way they want to be treated, not the way you want to be treated, but the way they want to be treated. And I think the golden rule is actually one of the problems that we have.
Okay.
Because if people treated people the way they wanted to be treated, then we wouldn't have the problems of discrimination that we have.
Because most people don't want to be discriminated against, so I would think that would still
who
apply.
Does?
But
Who does? And
anyway, I appreciate that. I mean, it'd be a whole other discussion. Clearly, we could have. And what it does is I think is I appreciate your giving direct answer, and also being modest in saying what you've looked at and haven't looked at, and I really appreciate the sentiment, and I feel like you and I could easily sit here and talk for a long time, and Drew, I guarantee you, could be right here with us both, and taking your side on some of these issues, and it'll be interesting to see, how he responds after this in sort of the after show. So please listen to that part of it, and it's just been a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you very much.
It's my pleasure.
And best wishes to you.
All right, thank you. You also.
Okay, well, this is Drew the Skeptic. I'm here with Bill to discuss the conversation you just heard with Neil. Bill, I thought Neil was really cool, and I like you, I appreciated what he said about what we're trying to do here. He seems like a kindred spirit, very happy to, just sort of hear all opinions, and not the kind of person who would want an echo chamber for his tribe. I enjoyed the conversation you guys had. You started off sort of talking about some things as you got into what I perceive to be like a moral values discussion. You had asked him at some point, if atheists sort of have a group morality. You had mentioned these Sunday gatherings that they're doing that maybe seem sort of church-like. He mentioned that he thought it was mostly about community. He wasn't particularly interested in going to one, I don't think, and I would have to agree. I don't think I really would be either, but I can see the value in community, even if it's not a religious community. So I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm not sure you really got a chance to respond about that. So did you have any other thoughts on that?
Well, I was going to ask you actually. Would you head out on Sunday morning, and instead of going to a church, might you head to sort of an atheist gathering where they sang songs and had poetry and had speakers and stuff?
So I think community is really important, but I mean for me it's having sort of a large church-like community is not particularly appealing. Having small groups of friends that meet up and hang out is more my style, or
yeah.
I don't know.
Sure.
I'm sure there are things to be gained from both ways of fellowship or community or whatever you want to call it. But for me, the one is more attractive than the other. So
yeah.
Those
Can you see how I can hear Christians saying, well, basically we have this religious instinct, and so if you deny God, then you're just going to want to still get together on Sundays anyway, but just do an atheist version of it. In other words, they'll look at it and say, well, it's just another form of religion. And would you sort of, not that you would agree with the criticism, but would you be sensitive to why? I mean, can you understand why they would say that?
Yeah, I guess. I mean, obviously I don't feel, inclined to go to one of these things, so I guess it wouldn't apply to me if that was their criticism.
No, it wouldn't. I know.
I don't have any. I would have really no instinct to defend, against that. It's fine with me if that's what people want to think. I don't really agree. But
yeah, right.
But I'm not. I like Neil. It's kind of hard for me to say anything about those because it's just not something I'm interested in. I will say I can see why people are. I mean, especially if you don't have, and then this is kind of what, some atheists that I sort of jive with more say about religion. It's like it's fine if that's what you need. If it's doing something positive for you, then great. I don't want to take your religion away. I think you're getting something positive along with some negatives, which is something that Neil gets to later. So you guys went on to talk about. You asked him, about again on that idea of morality. I think what you were saying, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that equal rights and some other values that atheists would hold and that pretty much all Westerners would hold have really come to us from Christianity. Is that kind of what you were getting at? You know,
Yeah.
as a backlash against like Roman values, which were very honor based, and they didn't give two hoots about equal rights. You know, they didn't.
Definitely not. Not most anyway.
And so Neil's response was interesting to me. He said, you know, he would say that Christianity and the Bible specifically has certainly influenced the culture, but he would say it's held the culture back because, you know, the Bible has things to say about gays, non-believers. He even cited witches, women, slaves that he would not agree with. And I'm not sure if he would be this charitable, but I would say that I agree with him, although I do think that Christianity was a moral innovation. So I kind of agree with you there too. You know, like it's obviously distinct when you look at it on the backdrop of Roman values. Like Christianity was a big change. I'm not a historian enough to know if I'm right about this, but it seems to me that it was a moral innovation. But I would agree.
Well, and there's that. Let me just interject. There's that historian he himself is an atheist, Tom Holland, who's a British historian, has recently published a book. I think it's called Dominion. But anyway, he makes the same case that Christianity was definitely a moral innovation in the Greco-Roman world. So anyway, it always helps when you have someone who's an actual historian and who himself is an atheist. So he's obviously not.
So you and Tom and
confirmation bias.
You and Tom and I all agree, you know, about the innovation factor.
Tom agrees with us.
I don't know if Neil would agree with us on that. He might, but he also said, you know, what I would say, I guess, is in addition to the fact that was a change, that was an innovation, I do agree with Neil that the Bible has things in it that could hold us back if we sort of take it for, you know, face value, or, you know, maybe even read it in the way that it was intended. I don't know. We would have to sort of hash that out. But I do think that, you know, part of Christianity, part of the Bible is this is actually where I see the divide. We don't have to wrap up, but I'm curious about your response to this. But I really do see the Bible as sort of closed and divisive. I don't use that as a pejorative. I use that as a descriptive. You know, it is actually making divisions, and, you know, anti-sin, of course, whereas atheism is, you know, not maybe not anti-sin as much as you know, you would maybe say to a fault, because it's, you know, it's the emphasis is tolerance, and the emphasis is inclusiveness and openness, instead of you know. So that's, to me, there's a dichotomy there, and I would just be curious what you think about that, if you believe that about the Bible, like that.
Yeah, I mean, so I think this is one area maybe where I think you're being pretty objective in the sense that you're acknowledging things that to me seem sort of obvious, and I think a lot of atheists don't. I also think that it's got to run the other direction. That for me, I think it's pretty obvious that there are moral assertions or moral examples, you know, what are considered positive moral examples in the Bible, or assertions, which have to be seen by an honest thinker living today as being problematic for even the Christian. And the most obvious one is the fact that slavery was regulated under the law of Moses, rather than just overtly banned. So I can't imagine a serious-minded Christian not thinking, hey, that just strikes me as problematic. I mean, like, if you're not acknowledging that, if you're just going to quickly dispense with it, then it just seems to me you're not taking that very seriously. Now, my conviction is going to be that the scriptures in the end are proven to be right and good and true and just, and I may not understand something right now, but that's why I'm digging myself, trying to understand these stories and what God was up to in these stories, these accounts of, things like that. And, sometimes in a lot of issues, I would feel like I'm perfectly content to defend the Bible's view, say on homosexuality or on what have you. But at other times, there's certain parts of the Bible where it's like, yeah, I don't know if I would say I have a real confident understanding, or where I would be able to say that's not problematic for me anymore, morally. So I guess I think I'm answering your question. That yes, I would acknowledge there's things that strike me as kind of obviously problematic, even morally, and are morally problematic. But I tend to think, that it's that I'll hopefully understand that at some point later.
So
But
that
also,
may even be a better place to draw the divide, because
Yeah.
so to me the issue is that to me is the problem with the Bible is that not just that there are things in it that you can't understand, or that you think, oh, this doesn't strike me as correct, but it's the fact that you have to, that you feel like in some way it must be correct, and you just have to understand it, rather than if you don't believe the Bible, you could say, well, it got a lot of things correct, but it got some things wrong, and we can continue to innovate. So Christianity was this innovation and improvement against Roman values, and then we can make improvements against Christian values. And I know that's not something any Christian would ever agree to, but to me it just seems like common sense. And so that's probably really where the divide is in the way that we look at the Bible as either the perfect standard of right, or just something that has good and bad parts.
Yeah. So obviously my confidence sort of in Scripture is because I see those moral problems as fairly few and far between, right? So and also there have been times where, and earlier in my life, I would have seen something as more morally problematic that was in the Bible, but now I've come to agree completely and wholeheartedly with the Bible's view on something. So in other words, it's sort of a over time I've thought that. I also feel zero compulsion, and maybe I'm a little different from other Christians this way, I'm not sure, but I don't feel any need to pretend that I'm going to understand. Like, maybe I will never understand satisfactorily this part of Exodus, where it includes some regulations about slavery. Maybe I'll just die, not really feeling like I have any kind of confidence about why God did that and why I'm comfortable with that. So I don't feel a pressure to act like there's not a problem if I think there's a problem. It's just that there's a lot of areas where I think, even for example, let's just take, say, homosexuality. If you're talking about an improvement on, say, the Bible's view, the Bible's view, I mean, the concept that each homosexual is of equal value as every other human being, every person, regardless of their religious convictions. I'm 100% in agreement with that. I think of that as just simply the Bible checking the Bible, meaning it's the notion of equal rights to me is something that's rooted in a uniquely Judeo-Christian worldview. And so it's just that Christians have done, to me, it's that they've done that very badly. So in that sense, I guess it's an improvement, but it's still an improvement that's working off of the fuel that came out of that golden rule. Do you have any specific response to that? We probably ought to wrap up, but I think that you're right about the divide in that sense. Clearly, you're going to think, hey, we can just kind of go forward into some new improvements, and I'm going to be thinking, well, on what terms? Like, what's going to guide that? Because up until now, our improvements, and from my perspective, all the moral improvements have been because people are now adopting the morality of the Bible.
Yeah, I understand that, and I think the fact that you don't feel like you have to understand enough to defend every jot and tittle is why I can why we can have these conversations, because I think that's a big trap that Christians fall into, is trying to do that and just coming out looking like they're not taking things seriously, really, just sort of.
I think Christians
things you don't understand is probably never a good policy.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think Christians are probably afraid that they're going to be criticized by other Christians when they say, "Hey, I don't understand this." But I think it's possible myself to be a Christian and have a very high view of Scripture and have a great confidence and claim, nonetheless, you just don't understand something, and acknowledge that it's problematic. I mean, I don't see why we can't do that. I still think in the end, like as a Christian, I really do think the Scripture will in the end be vindicated, but it may not be by me.
And that's how faith works. I think is you have an experience that you think, okay, well this is right in line with what I would expect if if I'm to believe God, and so here's this thing I don't understand, and I'm just going to believe him on that too, and then maybe that'll prove correct, and that's faith. And to me, this is the easiest argument I feel like I have to make. It's because all I have to do is appeal to common sense and say, well, if you're going on supernatural faith, if you're going on the idea that God has communicated to us through this, that it's a revelation, that it's supernatural, that your relationship with him and your history with him is the supernatural thing that's going on, then sure, that obviously that case would hold. But all I have to do is say, well, here's an alternate explanation that doesn't appeal to the supernatural, and it's a pretty easy case to make. And I'm not saying that I'm right. I'm just saying I don't feel like I have to really. It's a little bit more common sense my way. Doesn't necessarily mean it's right. It's just
because my comeback's going to be, well, what. Maybe your common sense is right, and maybe it's a warped ruler, and it's not grounded in anything that's eternal and objective and supernatural.
Right.
But we both agree we should use common sense.
Yeah. Well,
that's one thing we do agree with.
Yeah,
about.
It's funny. It's like you can use your common sense to subordinate it, I guess, to something that you believe, or you can just use your common sense directly. And so that's I'm not trying to
if you think of it this way, my common sense, right, and my trust in Scripture has been borne out over now what is 3 decades of studying Scripture, learning things along the way, and learning that if I align my mind with Scripture, I see it as right. Yeah,
I see where you're going,
it itself is common
sense. But at some point, you still have to say, well, I just don't understand this, and I don't have that. I have the luxury of not having to admit, to come to that part, and that's not saying that I'm right, because I fully admit that, like you say, my common sense could be a terrible ruler, but I believe it's the only one I have, and so therein lays the divide.
Yeah, therein lay. Surprise! I have some sense of confidence in an objective, ultimate standard, and yours is not going to be burdened by that. All right. Well, I think this has been good once again. Really enjoyed the follow up, and appreciate Neil and the interview I had with him.
Agreed. Thanks to Neil for sitting with you. I enjoy responding to these.
Yeah, and this is Bill the Christian.
And this is Drew the Skeptic. Thanks for listening.
The Divide is produced by Alan and Ben Hawbrooks and edited by John Workman. Dalton Reed handles IT. Join us for further discussion on this topic at our subreddit, TheDividebyiPUB. To learn more about other episodes and who we are, check out ipub.org/thedivide. See you next time on The Divide.